However, even worse than this, but also what has come to be expected, are the white knight establishment milquetoast soft-serve evangelical turds that came out with all of the same talking points as the atheist groups. Given that this has come to be so normative now, one can't help but ask why they even bother with the label Christian at all. But I suppose that if they drop that label, they may no longer be effective to the commies that support them. One can't help but think of Chesterton's words, quote, "These are the days when the Christian is expected to praise every creed except their own," end quote. Louisiana has just passed a law to have the Ten Commandments displayed in every public school classroom in their state. Of course, as one would expect, this has elicited the vitriol and scorn of every atheist group out there, or perhaps weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth on the level of a lesbo after Hillary lost in 2016 would be a more accurate description of their response. This is all to be expected from the open-minded tolerance brigade. However, even worse than this, but also what has come to be expected, are the white knight establishment milquetoast soft-serve evangelical turds that came out with all of the same talking points as the atheist groups. Given that this has come to be so normative now, one can't help but ask why they even bother with the label Christian at all. But I suppose that if they drop that label, they may no longer be effective to the commies that support them. One can't help but think of Chesterton's words, quote, "These are the days when the Christian is expected to praise every creed except their own," end quote. Given that every white knight has already swooped in to save humanity from the obviously wicked and tyrannical Christian nationalists, who must have had their hands in all of this by providing their commentary, I thought I would provide just a wee little bit of my own, being the unifying presence that I am after all. All of their responses that I have seen can be summarized in the following way. Separation of church and state. How would Christians respond if the Quran was forced on them? Or Christian nationalists are trying to impose a theocracy on everyone. How dare they? The White Knighters are basically arguing that this is a gross abuse of liberty, and that these naughty and obviously abusive Christians are forcing their religion on everyone, and worse yet, they are doing it in the high temple of the public schools. Everyone knows this is no place for the indoctrination of children, unless, of course, it involves communism, or sexual perversion, or racism, which are all obviously not religious, nor is the public school a religious institution funded by the state. The goal of these valiant crusaders, then, is to get these dastardly and offensive religious commandments out of the obviously neutral sphere of the public schools. The godly troublemaker exists to shine the light of Christ in the eyes of the idols of our day. We are able to do this because we are entirely listener-supported, which makes us cancel-proof and beholden to none. Your gifts of any amount support godly troublemaking and enable us to cut straight in a crooked world. Thanks for your support. At this point, one has to ask themselves whether or not it is even possible to give a response to such intellectual titans. But alas, we must try. First, in response to the separation of church and state, it is important to ask, whatever do you mean? If they mean that there is a separation of authority between the church and the state, we would say yes and amen. There certainly is a separation in authority and responsibility because God designed both church and state to be separated but related governing spheres. The church has an eldership appointed by the congregation that are responsible before the Lord to rightly divide the word of truth and administer the sacraments and exercise church discipline, the sign of which is the keys to the kingdom of heaven. The state does not interfere in these matters. Likewise, the state was appointed by the Lord to execute justice, the sign of which is the sword. This is the primary and foundational role of the state. The proper execution of justice cannot be properly understood apart from the word and law of God. Therefore, the proper and primary role of the state is to execute, enforce, and uphold righteous laws. All governing spheres of authority, whether home, church, or state, have their proper place in the plan of God and in glorifying God. Elders do not write public policy, nor do civil servants administer the sacraments, and so on. However, if by separation of church and state, which is a phrase that everyone should know is nowhere near the Constitution nor the Bill of Rights, in fact just the opposite, they mean to say that there can be no mention of God within a public governing institution. This is profoundly stupid and actually impossible. As Abraham Kuyper famously said, there is not a square inch of the universe that Christ is not sovereign over. Or, as R.C. Sproul once said, there are no maverick molecules in the universe. All of this means that there is no magical corner of our existence that is in some way neutral. White Knighters would say, yes, of course, but unbelievers don't see it that way. To which we would respond, so? White Knighters are so profoundly stupid that they see the removal of any mention of the triune God in the public sphere to be hospitable to the unregenerate, as a means of being able to then share the gospel with the unregenerate that they've already confessed to not be true. Paraphrasing Francis Schaeffer, quote, when there is no God above the state becomes God. The hard truth is that you cannot try and create a neutral sphere of operations without at the same time denying the Almighty and committing rank idolatry. All of this leads one to ask why the White Knighters so desperately long for that to be the case. Now, regarding the imposition of the Quran in schools, obviously Christians would be opposed to this. They would say, well, how does displaying the Ten Commandments differ from that? The White Knighters would say that. Well, it differs from that in that the Quran is an idolatrous book and a perversion of the truth. Every Christian professes that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which should be foundational to every educational institution, by definition. The White Knighters may again respond with, yes, but unbelievers don't believe that. To which we would respond with the emphatic, duh, and then ask, how does that change the fact of the matter? Also, it should be clearly noted that the Ten Commandments are to be displayed in schools. This doesn't mean that teachers will be expositing the Ten Commandments in schools, nor enforcing them or imposing them on anyone. This does not turn teachers into preachers, and is not a violation of spheres. Not only that, but one has to ask themselves, especially given our current cultural climate, how could any Christian ever complain about the Ten Commandments being displayed and seen by the masses? Is this not a wonderful thing? Would that not be helpful for kids to have those commandments before their eyes regularly? Also, I can't help but point out the irony that most of these White Knighters seem to also be never-Trumpers. The reason I point this out is because the White Knight never-Trumpers claim to be never-Trumpers because of Trump's character. I would agree. I don't believe Trump is any real friend of Christianity, though for differing reasons than the never-Trumpers. And the fact that the guy is an adulterer is beyond dispute. The reason I bring this up here is because they, of all people, should want the masses more familiar with the Ten Commandments in order to make their point, i.e., no adultery. No one is going to question Trump's character if they are not first convicted by the law of God. Furthermore, how could any Christian possibly argue that it is bad for kids to simply see the Ten Commandments regularly? What justification or grounds could they possibly have for this? Sometimes it's important to just step back and drink up all the delicious irony. This is certainly one of those instances. For decades, the evangelical intelligentsia have justified the existence of the pagan public schools because it is the only place in the world where evangelism can take place. And if you don't support the pagan public schools, then you obviously don't support evangelism. However, when the Ten Commandments are to be displayed in these same public schools, these same people scream like a demon being cast out, which is interesting. As far as the nefarious intentions of those terrible Christian nationalists creating a theocracy are concerned, I would just say a couple things. If the displaying of the Ten Commandments in public places constitutes a theocracy, then sign me up. That is much to be preferred over the current theocracy that we are living through. Also, I would say that a simple display of the Ten Commandments in public places is hardly the gross enforcement of a theocracy. Also, before we close, I would also like to point out that these same paragons of virtue that wail and gnash their teeth at the Ten Commandments have no problem displaying every form of sexual depravity in front of your kids in the name of tolerance. Let me just conclude by saying that these people suck on the level and for the same reasons that all of the prophets that opposed Micaiah sucked. Cheers.